I'm Professor Pat Murphy, and I'd like to welcome you to the final Berges lecture for the fall 2009 semester. I'd like to start by recognizing Mr. Jack Berges and his daughter and friends here from town who the Berges Lecture Series is named after. Jack's a pleasure having you with us. Let's give them all a round of applause. Our speaker tonight is Mr. David Langstaff. For some of you who read his case, and we did it in class early or today, he probably needs a little introduction. For most of the rest of you, I will add some background details. He's a business and community leader with extensive experience as Chief Executive Officer and a Director of Advanced Technology and Professional Services Companies. In recent years, in 2006-2007, he was CEO and co-chairman of Olive Group, a global provider of integrated security risk mitigation solutions in over 30 countries with principal offices in Dubai, London, and Washington, D.C. From 1995 until its sale to General Dynamics, he was the president, CEO, and director of Veridian Corporation. And a Harvard case was written about him and the corporation, and we've done that today's classes and others. He helped grow that values-based business tenfold from 1995 till its sale from $100 million to over a $1 billion company. From 84 to 95, he was executive vice president and COO of Space Industries International, and before that, he directed a successful management-led buyout of Calspan, and these were precursor companies to Veridian that I'll probably mention a little bit with you tonight. And early in his career, he was employed by the Inverness Group in Houston, and he held a number of corporate finance positions. He serves as a seminar moderator for the Aspen Institute. He also chairs the advisory board for the Business and Society program, and that's the one that does the Beyond Gray Pinstripes evaluation every 2 years. And I'm pleased to report to those of you who haven't heard it, Notre Dame was ranked 5th this year, but also 2 years ago and 4 years ago we were ranked 5th. It's good to be ranked high in something around here. And David serves on the board of directors of SRA International. He is doing, for those more mature members of the audience, he has a company he's involved with his brother who's doing a major PBS special on recorded music that'll be coming out in 2011. He's active in a number of community affairs, particularly in education, the environment, performing arts, and he's actually a performing artist. He holds both an undergraduate degree and an MBA from the Harvard Business School, and this is David's first trip to Notre Dame. His talk is The Key to Business Happiness, Aligning Personal and Professional Values. Please join me in giving a special Notre Dame welcome to David Langstaff.
So I can explain the Harvard thing. I didn't get into Notre Dame, which is, anyway, it's terrific being here. I've not been out here before. I've spent a lot of time in Indiana, but it's just great to come to a place that everybody all over the world knows about and to be part of this. I want to thank, first of all, I had a lot of fun this morning with the classes, 2 classes, studying Veridian. I come away inspired by the thinking of folks in classes. I'd love to spend many hours more with you and just hear your ideas, because I always learn something from these classes, whereas I'm the one who's supposed to tell you what happened. Your questions often just have me stop and have to really think about what I thought I knew in a new way. So I thank you for that. And I want to thank Professor Murphy and Professor Halloran as well, John, for letting me take up so much time in your class. And I am honored to be part of the Berges concert, or you can tell I do music as well, but lecture series in business ethics. There's nothing more important than ethics right now, and I think you all know that. So I'll admit that it's been a challenge thinking about what I would say to you today. And it's not because I don't have anything to say, but I dare say you can go to a business school campus anywhere in the country and you just get a lot of lectures about ethics. And so my challenge is, there are really 2 things. If everyone's talking about ethics, and has been for a while, why do we seem to have such a problem in practice with the lack of business ethics today? And secondly, how do I engage with you over the next hour and make it interesting, hopefully thought-provoking, at times uncomfortable, and hopefully relevant? Because I'm sure you don't want to just sit here and listen to someone spout off on stuff, and then you won't remember a word of it in 2 hours, much less 2 weeks. So the way I'm going to do this is to make my comments as blunt and direct as I can. I will make it personal. I'll try to create some discomfort. And yet the advice that I'm going to leave with you is breathtakingly simple at the end, but hard to do. I'm also going to bring in the voices of a number of other people, not because we need to burden you with a lot of what other people have said, but as much to let you know that this is a conversation going on now, and it's been going on for many years, and in some cases, many centuries. And one of my messages to you is jump in. You all need to have your voice heard as well. So I think there are two titles to this talk. One is around can a value be placed on values? And the other is the idea that the key to business happiness is aligning personal and professional values. So I'm not sure which talk you came to hear, but I think I can touch on both of these subjects. And I will really conclude around this notion of personal happiness or fulfillment, which I know sounds trite, but I actually think is very important. And it's important for you to be thinking about now and not be in a position in 25 or 30 years where you say, I wish I'd thought about that back then. I might have made different choices. So I want to start, though, by talking about a fundamental value. I think in many respects, one of the most important single values, and that is courage. There are at least two kinds of courage. There's physical courage, whether strength or fortitude, and of course mental courage, strength of mind, conviction, resolution to face the truth or do what's right. So I'll focus on mental courage and explore it on both the individual and institutional levels. On the individual level, it takes us to a discussion of principles or values. On an institutional level, it forces us to consider purpose. Both are lacking to the extent that they're needed today in business. Now, institutional courage and purpose. First, what is courage? Plato and many other secular and religious philosophers cite it as one of the four core virtues, along with temperance, justice, and wisdom, or in some cases, prudence. Aristotle talked about courage as the mean between two vices, recognizing that courage taken to either extreme is bad. Cowardice on one hand and recklessness on the other. There's a sense of balance to courage and a sense that judgment needs to be applied. Obviously, in some instances, the courageous act is to confront. In others, the courageous act may be to acquiesce. Hegel, in his Philosophy of Right, published in 1821, stated, "The true courage of civilized nations is readiness for sacrifice in the service of the state, so that the individual counts as only one amongst many." So most of you, I gather, will go into business, so permit me to take some liberties with Hegel. My point will apply to any institution, whether it's a not-for-profit, an NGO, or any other kind of enterprise. So that leaves us with the idea that the true courage of a good corporation is readiness for sacrifice in the service of society. Or the true courage of employees is readiness for sacrifice in the service of the corporation. So the statement begs the question, why? For what purpose do we make that kind of sacrifice? So we should consider purpose both at the level of the corporation, at the macro level, and also at the micro level, which questions the purpose of any one corporation. In the larger context, we like to talk a lot about a corporation's rights. I think we need to have more conversation about its responsibilities. The corporation, as I understand corporate law, was never created with an intent to be just for its shareholders. It was conceived in the context of a responsible contributor to society. So consider the recent or current financial mess. Are the problems we're experiencing a function of bad management, poor regulation, or a failure of business ethics? There are certainly problems on all fronts, but I would argue that a failure of ethics ranks right near the top. I believe that this failure of ethics can be explained in part by the fact that most corporations, and those that lead them, seem to have lost their sense of purpose and an understanding of their responsibility to society. Two quick examples. First, consider the behavior of Arthur Andersen in the case of Enron. It became so focused on the fees that drove revenue and profit growth that it forgot that its fundamental purpose was a fiduciary one: to serve as a check on business behavior and to assure the public that a company's accounting was accurate. That's what public accounting is. Second example, the CEO of a major money center bank, when asked recently whether his primary loyalties were to his shareholders or to his depositors, answered without hesitation, shareholders. Think about that answer. Where is an understanding of fiduciary responsibility? If this is the thinking on Wall Street, is it any surprise that we've got the problems that we do? At the individual corporate level, company boards and CEOs need to ask the fundamental question, what is it for? Companies need to have a sense of purpose or mission that goes beyond shareholder returns. How many times have you heard executives stand in front of you or the press and say, our goal as a company is to maximize profit for our shareholders? What kind of a goal is that? My experience, having built and run a professional services company, is that clarity of purpose matters. It's the key to unlocking employee commitment, building loyalty and a positive operating culture, enhancing productivity, and therefore overall performance. And I'll have more on this point in a few minutes. And that, above all, is the lesson of Viridian. The ones who really get it now may be those involved, and I dare say some of you, in social enterprise and social entrepreneurship. Frankly, I'm trying to figure out why we have a category called social enterprise at all. What sets these companies apart, other than that they have clear and explicit sense of purpose as their dominant focus, defined in the context of society, not just their financial shareholders. And they place equal emphasis on the how work is done, not just what they do. All companies should have a similar sense of purpose. I believe that two of the root causes of the current financial collapse can be traced to this inadequate sense of purpose. First, the triumph of the notion of shareholder dominance. Companies have forgotten that they exist for society and therefore a multiplicity of stakeholders. They forgot their responsibilities. They lack the grounding that a sense of purpose and the values implicit in that purpose would have provided. The notion of fiduciary responsibility was absent. If, as previously noted, corporate law never established the primacy of the shareholder in the first place, we need to have the courage now to rethink how we are interpreting and applying corporate law. Second, the triumph of short-term thinking and short-term profit over long-term creation of sustainable value. Boards of directors have been too complicit with regard to CEOs focused on meeting quarterly targets or maximizing near-term stock price at the expense of the creation of real and sustainable value. Purpose and strategy are absent. By insisting on purpose, we reintroduce consideration of the long term back into the discussion. For most missions cannot be accomplished in a quarter or even a year. From a society standpoint, we've got to be clear as to what we want and what we should expect from the corporation. In short, we need to be focused on creating sustainable economic value and not short-term shareholder value. And there is a difference. So look, it comes down to this. If companies don't have a sense of purpose, there's nothing to be courageous about. I believe that if more companies understood the importance of purpose and committed to earn the trust of society by how they do their work, we might have avoided many of the problems that we're experiencing today. So before leaving this examination of courage at the institutional level, let me connect a few dots that by this point should be obvious to you, and which help me segue to look at courage at the individual level. Having a committed institutional purpose that is honestly and proactively embraced enables a company to build its values around its purpose. And I would suggest that there are 4 very tangible reasons why this alignment of purpose and values is important. First, it motivates people, and therefore enables a company to better retain its employees and attract new ones. Second, it leads to better business results. Read the new book by Michael Beer, professor at Harvard, entitled High Commitment, High Performance, which provides ample evidence of the fact that companies that are able to realize high commitment from its employees deliver better operating results. It sounds like common sense, doesn't it? Third, having a strong set of values and the culture that develops from them around a clear purpose grounded in the needs of society will help keep you out of trouble. It doesn't surprise me that a CEO doesn't know what her employees are doing in all parts of the company. At Veridian, I had over 7,200 employees in nearly 100 locations. I couldn't possibly know what everyone was doing. But as a national security company, we had a clear sense of purpose, and our values were explicit and aligned. Employees knew that they could speak out if they saw problems and that we would act in accordance with our values. Our company values and culture would spotlight inappropriate behavior, giving us time to address situations before they became real problems. Our culture and our values became our first defense, acting as an early warning system. And finally, the alignment of purpose and values creates an environment where work is more fulfilling and employees are happier. Now, again, this last point sounds trite. I actually think it's the most important of all of them. And in thinking about business ethics, I think it is right on point. So let's turn to the individual, and I'll develop it. Back to Hegel. Instead of citizens and state, let's talk about individuals and principles. So, the true courage of an individual is readiness for sacrifice in the service of his or her principles. What are they for you? And my message is really simple here. Stand for something. It's a personal choice, but not standing for anything is not an option. Stand for something. You need to be specific, explicit, you've got to figure it out. Now, most people tend to believe they've got it figured out. But more often than not, I think it's figured out at the 64,000-foot level, or so buried within that it fails to guide and influence one's actions. You need to know the answer at ground level, at the level that drives or changes your behavior. I believe the implications of not standing for something are huge. It will impact your enjoyment at work, your relations with family and friends, and your own sense of self. Without knowing what you stand for, you are like a ship without an anchor or a corporation without a purpose. You have no basis for your own ethical grounding. Without knowing what you stand for, I believe you will fail as a leader. One of the toughest situations you can find yourself in business is being faced with a set of actions which make you uncomfortable, but being met with the comment, "Why not? It's perfectly legal." It's easy to stay in the realm of what is legal, but that does not excuse you from having standards. Yet, you see it all the time. There seems to be an acceptance of the idea that if something is legal, you don't have to think about it. An ethical standard is higher than a legal standard. Following the law doesn't take leadership. Meeting a higher standard does. You just consider 2 pivotal moments in American history. The writing and signing of the Declaration of Independence, a document 2/3 of which is devoted to trying to justify why it is our duty to revolt against government. And Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail during the Civil Rights Movement, where he states that justice requires that we differentiate between just and unjust laws, the unjust being those that are out of harmony with moral law. Both are examples of extraordinary leadership and courage. Now, I dare say that you all have a sense of your own values. You learned them before you were 12 years old. The key, though, is to bring them forward in your consciousness and commit to them in practice. You need to be present. Without them, you have no basis for ethical decision-making. Now, I stated that without knowing what you believe and what you stand for, you will fail as a leader. We all have our definitions of leadership, so here are mine. And I might caveat by saying that my focus is on sustainable leadership. I believe there are 4 primary characteristics a leader must have. The first is vision, which is you've got to know where you're going and provide a meaningful purpose. The second is communication skills, which is not only the ability to articulate, but the humility to listen. Values, know what you believe and the principles you won't violate under any circumstances. And then fourthly, courage, which is the guts to take action. It's interesting, in my experience, how many people have the first 3 but fail on the 4th. In the end, talk is cheap, and you've got to execute, you've got to make decisions, and ultimately you've got to lead by example. Note that integrity is not on my list. And as I think about it, integrity is not a primary value, but a derived value. It's got to be earned. My definition of integrity is the alignment of your actions with your values. If you can be counted on consistently over time to act in accordance with your values, you earn integrity. Integrity feeds another critical earned value, and that is trust. I can't demand that you trust me. You've got to give it to me. I've got to earn it. And I earn it by building a track record and a reputation for integrity over time. So a few minutes ago, I said that I would get back to the importance of personal fulfillment and happiness. We can talk all day about corporations and states and have a totally intellectual consideration of rights and responsibilities. But in the end, these enterprises are led by people. They will be led by you. How they will behave is a direct function of how you will think, how you believe, and how you will act. So Richard Sennett, he's a professor of sociology at the London School of Economics, I think also at NYU. He wrote an extremely thought-provoking book entitled The Corrosion of Character, The Personal Consequences of Work in the New Capitalism, that had a huge impact on me when I was building Viridian. He looked at the conflict between one's personal and professional values. He was writing in 1999 about the internet economy. And Sennett observed a business culture where there was no long-term, where decisions were made based on short-term impact or profit. It was a culture where flexibility, innovation, and risk-taking ruled, with companies spun, teams constantly forming, disbanding, and reforming. Short-term, build to flip, personal gain were all the rule. Sennett was talking about the internet boom 10 years ago, but it sure sounds familiar now, doesn't it? The internet boom before the crash delivered stunning economic results. Likewise, the world of subprime mortgages and unregulated derivatives delivered stunning financial results before the collapse. Does that make it okay, even if there had been no collapse? In Sennett's view, there are a lot of negatives to this new capitalism. An erosion of the sense of sustained purpose, a loss of a sense of integrity, a loss of understanding of self, an erosion of trust in others, and an increase in individual anxiety. Now, Sennett examines these issues and conflicts through a number of individual stories, including one about the successful high-tech consultant son of a Boston janitor. The son, and I quote, fears that the actions he needs to take and the way he has to live in order to survive in the modern economy have set his emotional inner life adrift. He goes on to say that his deepest worry is that he cannot offer the substance of his work life as an example to his children, of how they should conduct themselves ethically. The qualities of good work are not the qualities of good character. Think about that statement. The qualities of good work are not the qualities of good character. Is this true? How do you fight it? So I offer you two thoughts. First, you've got to know yourself. You've got to know what matters to you. You've got to know what you believe. And then you've got to hold yourself to the simple standard of acting in accordance with what you believe. You've got to set for yourself the goal of literally being your own best friend. A person you like and above all respect. As I mentioned earlier, this alignment of your actions with your principles is the source of personal integrity. And second, as you look for a job, find a place to work or create it yourself which has a clear purpose that you can embrace and where the purpose and values of the enterprise match your own. This alignment in your personal life and subsequent alignment of yourself with your work will enable you to avoid the trap that Sennett describes. It will bring to you a sense of personal satisfaction and fulfillment that no one can take from you. Now, this dual alignment is the foundation of happiness. Happiness or success is not about money, not about fame, not about what you can buy. The problem is most of us have to learn this afterwards. It starts with being your own best friend, respecting yourself, and living and working in an environment of shared purpose and values. These are the factors that tie families together. These are factors that make communities strong. And where we work is a community as well. These same factors apply. We should think of the corporation and the work environment as much as a community as you do your neighborhood. You probably spend more time there. John Bogle, the founder of the Vanguard Mutual Funds, tells the story in his book called Enough, True Measures of Money, Business, and Life, of Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller at a party hosted by a billionaire hedge fund manager. Vonnegut points out to Heller that their host has made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his wildly popular novel Catch-22 over its whole history. Heller responds, "Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough." Bogle goes on to note, and I quote, "The rampant greed that threatens to overwhelm our financial system and corporate world runs deeper than money. Not knowing what enough is subverts our professional values. It makes salespersons of those who should be fiduciaries of the investments entrusted to them. It turns a system that should be built on trust into one with counting as its foundation. Worse, this confusion about enough leads us astray in our larger lives. We chase the false rabbits of success. We too often bow down at the altar of the transitory and finally meaningless, and fail to cherish what is beyond calculation, indeed eternal." So when Veridian was bought by General Dynamics, what I knew and treasured about Veridian was lost. And to this day, I have people comment to me that Veridian was different. It marked the best time of their professional lives. I heard the same story at the very beginning of my career when I had a chance to work with the men and women who created the U.S. space program, who reminisced about the Apollo program as the best times of their lives. And it's because they were part of something bigger. And I think that's a fundamentally human need, to be part of something bigger than yourself. I think that if I could boil it down to one factor that made Veridian so successful, it would be this: clarity of purpose and corporate values that reflected that purpose, which were consistent with the kinds of values by which people want to live their lives. They were proud to work at Veridian. They didn't have to compromise their personal values to come to work at Veridian. You don't get this environment by accident. As CEO, I constantly had to think about whether our actions were reinforcing our commitment or undermining it. There are times when it can be quite uncomfortable, where the easier thing to do is to make an exception, just this one time. Maintaining this philosophy takes constant attention and effort. It's got to be purposeful. So let me close with a few points of practical advice and then a last comment. First, talk about this stuff. Here at Notre Dame, with your family, with your friends, talking about these issues takes away the isolation and it'll strengthen you. Second, when you're at work, find colleagues at work with whom you can talk about these issues. It's important to build your professional network of support, not just around functions and skills, but around ideas and values. Frankly, you should be able to do that more easily now with the kind of connectivity we've got and Facebook and other things than perhaps 10 years ago. Third, find your voice. One of the persons who connected Professor Murphy with me is Mary Gentili, and she's coming out with a book entitled Giving Voice to Values. Her research indicates that people who literally role-play difficult ethical situations in practice are more able to find their voice when confronted with such problems in reality. The point is, you need to develop your own source of courage to speak up when it becomes necessary. Fourth, for those of you at the beginning of your professional careers, pick your first boss well. No matter how talented they may be, don't go to work for someone you can't respect. I was fortunate in this regard, and to this day, when confronted with a difficult situation, I reflect on how my first boss would have handled it. They become a role model for you whether you know it or not. So pick wisely. And fifth, don't ever fall into the trap believing that the ends justify the means. If this happens, you've lost. For values and principles, for the most part, live in the realm of the means. Values are about how you act more than what you are pursuing. So, in closing, I think all of what I've been talking about is going to be harder for you than it has been for any recent generation, with one caveat. You're living in a technology-driven world that is more connected and networked than ever before in history. In many respects, you're living in Senate's world, but on steroids. You need to find a way to engage in this frenetic, interconnected world on terms that are acceptable to you. How many of you don't have a BlackBerry or a Palm or some sort of a PDA? Well, good for you. This is don't have. Okay, good for you. But it's even more complicated. As a global community, we're finally becoming aware that we're one community. John Gardner is a great author on leadership, among other things, the founder of Common Cause. He asked the question, and I paraphrase, how do we create the good society in a world of conflicting good values? Choosing right from wrong isn't hard, but how do you choose right from right when they are in conflict? Whose values? Yours or theirs? How do we address this issue when the good society is defined as one globe? So finding a common ground will require true leadership and a fair dose of humility in the years ahead. You're dealing with a world, certainly in the US, that in many ways has gotten off track. The metrics of success we now have are the wrong ones, as John Bogle points out. You've got to engage in a new conversation, one that questions the kind of capitalism we want to have. The press makes this out that if you're not for totally free markets and capitalism, you must be for socialism. That's completely false. There are many gradations of capitalism, and we have a choice. So here's the caveat that I mentioned. If there's a silver lining to the recent financial crisis, it is that people are willing to have this conversation. You need to join in this conversation and let your voice be heard. The Financial Times has begun this dialogue. British philosopher Philip Blond has challenged us to rethink what we want in a good society. For him, it is, and he says, one that people want to live in, empowered, secure, and sustainable communities of shared virtue and prosperity. Others have written about the need to elevate the value of arts and music in society. Pritam Singh, a British lecturer of economics, has written of capitalism lacking a soul. I was just reading Harry Lewis, a former dean of Harvard College, who's making exactly this same point, but about education. In his book, Excellence Without a Soul, How a Great University Forgot Education. He notes, the loss of purpose in America's great colleges is not inconsequential. These places drive American education, on which so much of our future depends. It is time to ask whether they are doing the job we want them to do. This is exactly what we've got to be asking about our corporate leadership. We've lived with a blind faith in the benevolent impact of market forces and in Adam Smith's invisible hand that society will benefit if we don't interfere with natural market forces. Well, people didn't read their Smith and understand what he pointed out as the consequences of unchecked free enterprise. In Wealth of Nations, he says, the man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. This is the father of laissez-faire capitalism. Is this the kind of capitalism we want? I mean, even Adam Smith knew that a rising tide, in fact, would not raise all boats. More recently, but still 35 years ago, Art Oken, the economic advisor to President Johnson, warned us that the market needs a place and the market needs to be kept in place. Given the chance, the market would sweep away all other values and establish a vending machine society. Guess what? Again, is this the kind of capitalism we want? You need to join in this discussion and give thought to what capitalism 2.0 might look like. Because how these issues are resolved will shape your world. You have the opportunity to introduce a new morality into the marketplace. And without such a new morality and a clearer sense of purpose, ethical business leadership may well remain on the sidelines as the exception. And doesn't it strike you as curious that today we are not hearing from one voice? Where are the business leaders? We can get into a long second lecture on the absence of the businessman and the lack of business leadership in these important discussions. Unfortunately, their absence makes my point. I noticed coming out, I think it's in Newsweek magazine, Pete Peterson has his editorial at the end of that, and he makes exactly this point, which is to observe that we hear a lot of voices, but the business leader is absent from the discussion. My final thought for you probably won't make won't make me any friends amongst your faculty. And I turn to Ralph Waldo Emerson, who stated that character is higher than intellect. A great soul will be strong to live as well as think. So today you're here at business school. You're gaining knowledge and strengthening your intellect. Don't forget that you're developing only one part of who you are and what you will be. And as Emerson notes, it's the lesser part. In the end, what will make you a great business person, a great leader, and a good person, and your own best friend, is not just what you have up here, nor what you believe here, but it's how you align the two. And so I close with our newest old philosopher, Albus Dumbledore, who stated to Harry Potter, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Thank you.
Hi. So you're a Harvard guy, and in the heat of the economic crisis, Harvard was taking a lot of flack for churning out business leaders that didn't necessarily have your values. And when Mr. Neville Isdale was here giving his Berges lecture series, he brought an article that claimed that business schools were churning out jargon-spewing economic vandals. Your talk has stressed knowing yourself and standing for something. Where do you think that business schools fit into this puzzle, and have they failed us, and what can they do?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think business schools are any different than other schools. It's not about learning formulas and not about learning management practices. There's a great article that was written by Roger Martin, who's the dean of the business school in the University of Toronto, about how all these business management theories and philosophies and practices have just completely misled us. So I think what my personal feeling is that ethical issues need to be interwoven in all courses. You've got to teach it in finance and strategy and marketing and all these sorts of things, and you've got to sort of seize on the moment of an ethical choice and make that a teaching moment, rather than just go to finance, go to strategy, and then go to ethics over here. I think it's just got to become interwoven as part of what we talk about all the time, because it's not a function. It's not something you can just separate from everything else. So I actually think the criticism of the Harvards and the Stanfords and others is valid. That we think, I mean, it's what Emerson said, we think it's all about the formulas and the intellectual bit, and we're not spending enough time about how you act and how you align it with what you stand for.
Thanks for coming. Just a quick question is, when we're looking at our job, whether it's out of business school or undergrad, often, where you go, it's not that easy to get a good job, right, at a good company. And so you talked about finding a good boss. And often when you're in interviews, you have no idea who your boss is going to be. So it seems, I know I've been fortunate to have one boss who was great and others who didn't help me out that much. And so I learned a ton. But it's very difficult to do. So maybe any thoughts on that conflict between a good company and otherwise?
You probably get a lot of advice about how to do interviews and stuff. My answer is go on offense. You're there, you think you're there to answer their questions, and half the time they're probably the same old questions. You wonder whether this person is really getting a sense of who you are. Go on offense, you interview them. And you ask them about ask them specifically about what the purpose of their business is. Ask them about what their values are. Ask them about ethical issues. What are some of the ethical issues that come up in their industry? Go on offense and be asking about it. First of all, it'll impress the interviewer that you're thinking about this stuff. And secondly, you're going to learn from whoever that is, who you may not see again, but you will learn whether the company actually is a place that you might want to work. And you'd be surprised at how many people stumble and can't answer those questions, yet they've been working there for years. And so I just think you got to go on the offense, because that also is how you begin this. You get into this conversation, because it'll go back and they'll say that geez, I had 3 people asking me about our purpose, and rejected this notion that it's all about shareholder maximization and all that kind of stuff. And this is how you can begin to change things. But be a voice, be persistent, and go on offense. Yep.
I had a question about your criticism regarding shareholder primacy. Is there any way to realign shareholder interests so that it does align with the company's purpose without focusing on the bottom line or other quantifiables?
I think that we've talked, and I've told you about my situation in Veridian. Before we went public, I try to figure out what financial metrics would I focus on, and I talk about sustainable long-term value creation, and there's a difference between a fair return, which shareholders deserve, and maximum return at the expense of everyone else. And I think what you have to do is speak in terms of, we will provide you a fair return, and then define it as you go. But that does not mean that they need to have every nickel go their way, because you do need to be making investments in your other stakeholders. So it's about setting up expectations, where you may find certain investors say, why should I go with you and only get a 12% return when I can go with this guy over here and get 13.5? Go over there. Let them go. You don't want those shareholders. And what you want are people that are going to understand your philosophy, be supportive of that, not be surprised when you make decisions that way. And I think you can really, as a CEO, you can communicate that. But you have to know that that's important. And too many, it's back to the point that the woman made over here. We fall into this jargon of maximizing shareholder returns and stuff without really thinking about it or knowing what we're talking about. You don't have to deliver it that way.
You talk about the role of government and how it's a necessary component to keep capitalism in check. How do you see their role, and how do we help shape that?
Well, I mean, the government's got a role, clearly, and we've got all these institutions that are there, some of whom haven't done their job, many of which do their job quite well. The question is, one can have we don't get to start with a blank slate. I mean, we have to start with where we are. And in fact, I've just done some work, again, with Aspen Institute on looking at what do we need our government to do now to help us get out of this, but more importantly, to help us avoid falling into these sorts of problems later on. And we came up with a set of principles, and part of the Aspen Institute way is that we don't get a room full of CEOs, because then you get CEO groupthink, and they all agree with something which is completely impractical because they haven't considered everything they don't know. So we get the CEOs, we get the institutional investors, we get labor, we get government, we get all sorts of people purposefully trying to assemble a group of people who normally don't agree, and then see if we can find some common ground. And what we've come up with are 3 or 4 principles. One is we should change the capital gains tax rates and encourage longer-term investment. You can't ask the capitalist system to behave in ways that don't make sense. So what we have to do is change the incentives so that the forces of the system itself will work in the way that you want. Change the incentives so we get the behavior we want. Secondly, the investment industry, interestingly, is not held to the same kinds of fiduciary standards that we get, that other industries or companies are held to. So they mutual fund managers and such don't have to give thought to the purpose of why you're investing with them. And so you're saving for retirement, and they're investing short term. They're churning, they're costing money. You've got this misfit between what the intermediaries are doing and what the purpose of you and me putting our funds in those mutual funds or whatever want to have done. And there needs to be now standards on those that invest to make sure that there's an alignment with the purpose of the investors. Thirdly, more transparency. We need to know how people at mostly the investment houses are compensated. I mean, don't get me on compensation, which is just unconscionable. And I don't know how many of you want to go work for Goldman Sachs. I personally find it stunning and almost incomprehensible that one can pay these kinds of bonuses that they're paying, or proposing to pay, so quickly after. Well, first of all, at all, but then coming after this mess, where we all saved that firm. Don't make any mistake about it. And they claim that, of course, we didn't, but that's another story. But I think increasing transparency on compensation matters on the investment side, changing capital gains rates, and being clear about the fiduciary standard of mutual funds and other investment houses are 3 steps that could be taken that would help change the system a bit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. First off, thank you for coming to campus. Your participation in class this morning was immensely valuable, very interesting. My question is about the Viridian situation. When it was taken over by General Dynamics, why did you choose to leave the organization? Why didn't you and your leadership team continue with being a part of Viridian or General Dynamics and trying to maintain that values within that part of the organization?
Well, for a number of reasons. One is I didn't think I could be effective because you're talking about at the time a $20+ billion company, the culture of which was anchored in making ships and planes and weapons with our business. I didn't think I could be effective. Secondly, what they wanted to do was take this piece of Viridian, put it in that division, this piece of Viridian, put it over here. I made a case that what they should actually do is keep the brand, let it be Viridian, fold their similar kind of work, which was less than what we had, under this Viridian brand, and run it as Viridian, a division of General Dynamics. But they had different plans. So as the buyer, it's their money. They bought it. They can do what they want. And but what effectively they wanted to do, and what happens in this industry is you've got your operating divisions and you've got the corporate office. They just want to lop off the corporate office, take the operating divisions, and divide them up within their business. So it really wasn't much of an option.
Was that something that you, I'm not sure if you did or if you didn't, was that something that you could have made part of the negotiations, trying to put that on the table, saying we're only going to sell if you're willing to keep the brand together?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and the answer is, during the time when, I spoke about the culture, I talked a lot about what was the successful orientation of the business, the customer service orientation, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's their money, they bought it. I mean, you sell me a house, or I sell you a house, and you have a vision for what you want to do with that house. You don't want me hanging around saying, well, wait a minute, you need blue curtains on that window. It's your house, and it's their company. So there's no way, it would have been inappropriate, and I think correctly inappropriate, to try to do it. And furthermore, even if I'd done it, how would you enforce it? So it's just not practical.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The title of the lecture was Placing Value on Value, and how feasible do you think it is in the future to place some sort of quantifiable measure on things such as CSR and other, I guess, more intangible qualities about a business?
So my response would be to ask you, can you put a value on love? Is it a matter of just cost and you'll move from this guy to that guy sort of thing or whatever? I mean, it's just, there's certain things that don't lend themselves to quantification. And so the way we talk about it is, company X buys company Y. I mean, General Dynamics bought Veridian, they paid a 75% premium over market. So the answer to your question is in that premium somewhere. But, is it something which can be reduced to a formula and a number? I don't think it can. I mean, it's judgment, again, at the end of the day, that you're just willing to go so far and not further, or you're willing to reach just so far because you think it's so important. But we tend to be in sort of at a time when we want to drive everything down to numbers and metrics that I think don't work for all categories. So, yeah. I actually, I think they become undervalued because we're trained that we're not taught that those are the metrics. And I actually think a lot of people just don't think about it. It surprises me at how much time we spend getting to quality controls at certain levels and Six Sigma and all this kind of stuff, which really focuses on getting every bit of inefficiency out of our manufacturing processes and things like that, and how little time we think about what it takes to motivate a person and what it takes to create a more productive person. We talked about Veridian in the case where we were bought by a company which is a hardware company where the person is a cost. And if they need more margin, the way you get it, and you read it every day in the paper, you lay people off. You take the cost of laying them off as a one-time charge, you pretend it didn't happen, and then you get higher margin going forward. And in a services business, that's not the way you look at your people. They are your asset. And so we ought to be spending as much time thinking about how to make them productive. And I'm just constantly shocked at how little time is done in that area. You see it with the McKinseys. I mean, there's some very good firms that do this, certainly. But for the most part, it is an under-focused area. Good.
Thank you very much. We have a little gift to remember your day. Something warm. I think it's even going to get cold in the D.C. area. But this has been a great evening with you, and thanks for spending the time with us, and thanks to all of you.